And Brandon, let's move on. We are actually, I know at the beginning of the podcast, I said we got 2 great new reviews on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, which if you're listening on or you have it, please go ahead and give us a 5-star review if you would be so kind. But in this segment, we're going to be a couple of good old boys, Brandon. We're going to talk about the SEC, and we're going to be talking about one team in particular, and that is the Georgia Bulldogs. And the reason why we're talking about Georgia is last week we talked about LSU, Florida. Georgia's got a big matchup with LSU this weekend, and I'm like, I didn't want to do another LSU versus blank team because I feel like we've done that enough this year. But I looked at the schedule, and I'm like, you know what? Georgia has some tough teams coming up. They've got LSU, they've got Florida, then they go to Kentucky. So they're at LSU, neutral site for Florida, at Kentucky, finally home against Auburn. And kind of to set this all up before I ask you the question, we're going to take a little history lesson because you know how people love history lessons and everything. If I look at, and I'm looking at Winsipedia.com, which the great thing about this site, Brandon, I can put in any 2 teams and tell you their head-to-head and who have won each game. And the thing I'm looking at most importantly is the head-to-head to these 2 teams. And when it comes to Georgia and LSU, Georgia is on the winning streak. They have the 1-game win streak, but LSU leads it 16-13 and 1. They have 1 tie. The last meeting was in 2013, so these teams have not met since Kirby Smart has been in Athens. The Florida game, Georgia has most of the wins at 50 compared to 43 for Florida. Under Kirby Smart, they are 1-1. They lost the first meeting in Jacksonville, Florida. They won the second meeting in Jacksonville, Florida last year. Kentucky, it's been a one-dog race here, literally one-dog race. The Bulldogs are 57-12-2 against the Kentucky Wildcats. They are 2-0 against Kentucky, 1 in Lexington, 1 in Athens since Kirby Smart has joined the Bulldogs. And then with Auburn, the Dogs lead 58-56-8. And since Kirby Smart has been with the Bulldogs, they won in Athens, they lost at Auburn, but then beat Auburn in the SEC title game. So he is 2-1 against Auburn with Kirby Smart as the head coach. With all this encompassing, with this season too, because with the Kentucky thing, the grain of salt I want to do is last year's and the year before, that's not this year's Kentucky team, although that 2016 season, Georgia only won 27-24, so Kentucky was in that game. What I want to ask you, Brandon, is look into your crystal ball. And after 4 weeks, 3 of which we will already have our first college football playoff rankings after the first 2 games of this. Actually, it's the next 5 weeks because they got a bye week in there. So after the next 4 games for Georgia, are they going to be able to survive this onslaught of LSU, Florida, Kentucky, and Auburn?
There's going to be a loss in there. There's going to be a loss
Just
in there.
one?
In my mind, I don't think there'll be more than 1.
Okay.
I don't think, but I do see 1. I do see one. There's got to be 1 in there.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be, and I'm not trying to say that blindly.
I'll tell you for sure, it's not LSU because Brandon, after last week, Joe Burrow is not the guy. He's not the guy. Doesn't have the later. That's all I could think of. Like after Florida went up by 1, I'm like, unless Joe Burrow leads them to win this game, Brandon's going to think, I told you Joe Burrow doesn't have it in him to win a game late.
So now
That's all I could think
now
of.
To be completely fair to Joe Burrow, his wide receivers didn't give him any help because they dropped a number of passes, easy passes, that these tall wide receivers should be catching that would have extended the plays, that would have extended drives, that would have gotten them down
the game
into possible field goal territory. So while Florida's defense, let's all be very clear, they're very good, and they showed it, the LSU wide receivers sucked. They were very bad when in crunch time when Joe Burrow needed them, and that was part of the cause of it. So while I don't think that Joe Burrow showed that he was an elite college quarterback over the weekend on Saturday, his wide receivers weren't there to help him, and they're supposed to be. But this is going to be a good matchup. The game at LSU, this Georgia Bulldog team, they're an interesting one because if you look at the last 2 weeks, they played Vandy, they won 41-13, blowout. The week before, they beat Tennessee. Both of these games at home, they beat Tennessee 38-12, blowout.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at it, they did not have fast starts. Jake Fromm, it's taken him some time to get going, to the point where people have said, well, is there going to be a guy to push Jake Fromm for that starting spot?
Mm-hmm.
It's not good. Not that there's going to be someone that does that. Not that it changes Kirby Smart's mind and he goes with a different quarterback. But when people are saying that about the number 2 team ranked right now, the Georgia Bulldogs, and you're 6-0 and you're kind of in the middle of your season, Alabama, yeah, it happened over the offseason. It happened in camp. Well, is there going to be someone to push Jalen Hurts? Yeah, it's Tua, and he pushed him, and he's there.
Mm-hmm.
But Georgia, if this is possibly in the middle of the season, in your toughest stretch, when someone's saying that, now am I maybe having a bit of an overreaction and blowing it a little bit out of proportion? Possibly, but I'm bringing up something that has been brought up and something that Georgia has mentioned. But Jake Fromm, what he has to do is, and I know that people, especially on the side of Georgia, are going to say, you're nuts, but he's got to play better. I mean, and to say a guy needs to play better after a 276-yard, 3-touchdown performance against Vanderbilt, yeah, they might think that I need to take some meds. But the game before that against Tennessee, you only have 185 passing yards. You get 38 points. But a lot of it came on the ground game. That's where it was. It was all based off running on the ground, and I get that. That's fine. That's fine. There's a lot of games, and you can even look to the NFL where there's a lot of games where guys, their quarterbacks don't have extremely great stats, but they have a great running day. The running back goes off, explodes. It's his day. You keep it on the ground, and you do what works. And at the end of the day, all that matters is the win. And that is all that matters right here are the wins. They are 6-0. Georgia is playing good. They have played well, but they have started slow. And that these are against lesser opponents. And Ricky, this is where I kind of want to open the floor to you after I've gone on my long rant. I would say it wasn't a rant; it was a discussion.
Here's your opening statement.
My opening monologue. What are they gonna do against a team like an LSU, who has a pretty good defense, a team like a Florida who has an outstanding defense? What are they going to do if they start slow there? How are they going to respond? And that's where I'm at right now with the Georgia Bulldogs, and that is why I don't think that they can come out of these next 4 games spotless.
Well, for me, the game that I look at 2 of them, Florida and Kentucky. And the reason why is I look at LSU, that should be a good game, but I'll be completely honest, LSU, although I rode them with Florida, I rode them against Ole Miss, basically ever since they started to do good, I started to pick them. I rode them against Auburn. If we look at it, they lose to Florida. You mentioned why. They only win by 1 point to Auburn. They haven't looked exactly like they were in that first game against the Miami Hurricanes, which I look at it and go, I think Georgia gets it done. Spoiler. Gets it done against LSU. I also think Georgia will get it done against Auburn, the last game of this stretch of 4. The reason why I say that, LSU has already beaten Auburn. Auburn has already lost to Mississippi State. They did that this past week. And by this time, they could virtually have a 3rd conference loss on the schedule because they play Texas A&M on November 2nd, the week before they would play Georgia. So Auburn could be looking at 3 SEC losses, which would virtually, if they're not already out of the race for the SEC West, which I'll be honest, they're out right now. They lost that this past weekend because there's no way Alabama is losing 2 games. So bye-bye Auburn, you're no longer in the race. Texas A&M could be at least playing for that race because right now they only have 1 conference loss. I look at Florida, I look at Kentucky, and mainly why I look at those, they are on the same side of the conference as Georgia. Both have 1 loss. Both with wins could then tie Georgia, could then get them into a SEC championship game, and if they win that game, could get them in a college football playoff discussion. The second thing I'm thinking about is, you want to know why there's a controversy in Georgia? Do you really want to know why there is one? Because last year's number 1 recruit decided, I'm going to go to Georgia. I even mentioned it to you on a podcast because the day he made Justin Fields, the day he announced where he was going to go, I was like, why would you do that? Jake Fromm is already there. You're a dual threat quarterback. Why not go to Louisville where they don't have a quarterback and you could be the guy? Why not go to Florida State where you could take over for DeAndre Francois, because I wasn't too high on him coming into the beginning of the year, and you could be the guy. Hell, at the time, Joe Burrow wasn't even in LSU. LSU, I believe, was one of his choices. He could have went there and been the guy at LSU. No, he chose to stay home. I believe it's stay home in Georgia, although they had Jake Fromm. And I'm reading an article here on 27sports.com where they said that just this past weekend on College Game Day, the Game Day guys had a heated debate about this, where it says David Pollack on Saturday believes true freshman Justin Fields has earned snaps and will continue to see action behind Jake Fromm thanks to his proven success in the early goings, where Herb Street and Reese Davis were quick to back Fromm. Georgia's incumbent, who has been incredible since his first start at Notre Dame last fall, yada, yada, yada. It's a very Tua situation. It's a very Alabama, I almost said Auburn, Alabama situation for Georgia to be in. I would not be surprised if during any of these games, I'm not saying it's going to happen, I'm not saying it should happen, I'm just saying I'm not going to be surprised if during any of these 4 games, if Jake Fromm starts to struggle, why not throw in a guy like Justin Fields, who, yes, he's a freshman, but why not throw in a guy who's number 1 recruit, dual threat quarterback, and against these defenses, what if you even use him? Hey, we're going to use him in this package. We're going to use him here to kind of get the defense shifting over, use him on RPOs, use him on the run to keep the defense second guessing, because that's a problem that maybe Florida and Kentucky, Georgia falls into. Drop back, and then it's just, I'm going to pin my ears back as a defender and go after Jake Fromm and try to make his day hell, or make his day hell all game.
Ricky, to now move into this matchup this weekend with Georgia on the road at LSU, what is it that you think LSU has to be able to do against Georgia to be able to get this win? Because for me personally, Georgia's giving up on average about 245 yards on the ground per game. They're only allowing about 13 points per game to opponents, which is great, but allowing 245 yards of rushing on the ground. You said it last week. For me this week, key in this game, it's going to be Nick Brossette and who's the other guy? Hilaire. I think that this is going to be a really big game on the ground for LSU, or at least it could be. At least it could be, because this is certainly a team in Georgia, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So that's, sorry, on my fault for not knowing that right off the top of my head, but I think that this duo could do that this weekend against Georgia. I don't see another way that they might be able to get this win, because Joe Burrow, I think they need to be able to really put the ball, keep the ball on the ground, not put the ball on the ground, not turn it over, but keep the ball on the ground with Brissett, with Edwards-Helaire to ensure a possible victory. Burrow was able to make some plays, and he made some really good plays with his legs. He did a really good job of running for a couple of first downs, of realizing that there was no one open. He doesn't throw it away. He doesn't crumble under pressure, and he takes it and he runs for the first down. I think that awareness, that shows a poised quarterback. He needs to be able to do those same types of things this weekend. He needs to be able to have the same type of decision-making this weekend. And honestly, his receivers, guys like Justin Jefferson, they let him down last week, to be quite frank about it, especially in the final moments. He needs to be able to rely on those guys, and they need to be able to come through for him in the clutch.
I think it comes down to two things for LSU. Number one, Joe Burrow. And the reason why, like, me and you are flipped this week. Last week I said Nick Brossett's the guy. This week I'm saying it's Joe Burrow. And the reason why I say that is Nick Brissett last week, he only had 95 yards, but he had 2 touchdowns. He gave them 14 points on the ground. The big one, and I'm not saying that it's all Joe Burrow's fault, but when you look at the stats, you can't win if you have this. No touchdowns, 2 interceptions. You can't turn over the ball. On the other side, I'm looking at LSU's cornerbacks. I'm looking at that secondary. And you can put in the first and second level as well. This pressure could lead to this, but more important, the cornerbacks. And the thing that I look at is, are you going to cause Georgia to turn over the football? LSU right now ranks 8th. Well, not 8th. They have 8. They rank 12th overall, tied for 12th in total interceptions this year. Jake Fromm, if you just look at his stats, he's only thrown 2 INTs this year, 1 against Missouri, 1 against South Carolina. This is a kid that does not turn over the football. Can you make it to where he turns over the football? Or even, and this isn't even like a win, you know what? No, they have to turn over the football. I was going to say, or if they have it, we're like Tennessee, where he didn't have a touchdown, but he didn't have INTs. No. You have to force turnovers, at least 2. I'll take 1, but at least 2 for LSU to feel good about this game. Otherwise, how I see it, Georgia's going to win this week. They'll have 2 challenging games against Florida and Kentucky, could possibly lose one of those, and then win against Auburn, and that's what we could be looking at, either a 3-1 or 2-2 team in this 4-game stretch at the end of it, with the losses coming to either Florida, either to Kentucky, or to both.
At the end, I think this is a big game for both teams. The outcome certainly is going to have an impact both ways, because if you look at it, and for the Georgia Bulldogs, if it's a win on their side, they continue to keep their pace in the conference on the east side. If LSU gets a win, that's huge for them, because they'd be 3-1 in the conference, kind of maintaining their pace right behind Alabama, with Texas A&M behind them, but not real close. But if Georgia loses here, the door is open for Kentucky. The door is open for Florida. Kentucky's next 2 games, I believe it is Vandy and Missouri, 2 teams that I think Kentucky should win. I think they should have won this past weekend. They didn't. They played a good game, but they did not do it. And then Florida, their next 2 games are Vandy and Georgia. So things get very, very interesting here if the Georgia Bulldogs lose this weekend.
Well, let's be completely honest. The Florida-Kentucky, this game, whatever happens in Georgia, LSU, will not affect that. These 2 teams will get their shot at Georgia. Florida will get the first shot. Kentucky will get the next shot. And I believe Florida and Kentucky even play later in the year. I'm going to double check on Kentucky's. Yeah, both of them. No, they already played. Kentucky got that win. So Kentucky is sitting in the driver's seat when it comes to those 2 teams. The last thing I will say before we go on into our picks is I could see this year's Georgia team being much like last year's Alabama team. Alabama lost to the 6th ranked Auburn Tigers. Whereas, think about it after this one. Let's say Georgia wins, Florida moves up. Florida could be a top 10 team in the AP rankings. They would have to only move up 4 spots. We'll see how it shakes up after this week. But they could be a similar team, lose to a top 10 SEC team, not make the conference championship. If they win out and only have one loss, this Georgia team could be much like Alabama last year, where it's like, hey, we lost one game, but it was against the team that went to the SEC championship game and then got steamrolled by Alabama, because I do think that Kentucky and Florida would lose. I shouldn't have said steamrolled, but they'll lose to Alabama in an SEC title game. Before we move on, any quick thought to that, any reaction to that?
Excited to watch it this weekend.
Well, this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Will Georgia survive the next 4 games? They've got LSU, Florida, Kentucky, and then Auburn. Let us know what you guys think down below in that comment section.